Hi again, it's Brandy Dusky, and this is EDL 852 Module 10, Student Learning Norms. We should be driving the bus towards meeting our students' expectations. Speaking of expectations, let's look into that. Schools typically have high expectations for students, but what about our students' expectations for school? These often get less attention, though they're essential for keeping kids in school and actively engaged in their learning. Let's look into that a little bit. Our resources identified 10 expectations or norms for student learning. Those norms include relationships, relevance, time, the pace of learning, timing, the sequence of learning, play, practice, choice, authenticity, challenge, and application. Let's look a little closer into what those norms are. Relationships should indicate that our students aren't just a face in the crowd or a test score on our report card. We know our students, we know their interests and talents, and we help them build relationships with others, both peers and adults, for future success. Kids look to people, places, and circumstances that fulfill them. They seek to join learning communities and communities of practice in and out of school. Since their teachers are significant people in their lives, students crave a relationship with them as mentors and coaches, though schools often fall short of this due to time constraints and other sorts of expectations. Relationships should be a key component. Let's look at relevance. Are school expectations just a series of hoops for students to jump through? Are we engaging them where their interests are and helping them to understand how what they're learning contributes to the larger community as a whole? Think back. How many times as you sat in your classes as a student did you say, "I'll never use this in real life and in the work that I want to do"? Heck, how many times do you hear your students say something like that? Let's think about these questions. If your students asked, "Once you know me, do you make an effort to use what you know to engage me in productive learning? To build on my strengths? To develop my talents? Do you help me see what you are teaching as helping me to achieve my career and life aspirations?" How do we answer those things? Moving on, let's look into time, or the pace of learning. Is that pace determined by the teacher, by the expectations of the textbook moving through to make sure we make it to the end of the chapter by the correct time, to make it to the end of the book by the end of the year? Or are students able to learn at their own pace? Can they dive deeper and learn more on a topic if it's of interest to them, or must we move on? In Charles Handy's The Age of Unreason, he provides an insightful example that illustrates the problems that schools have with time. Imagine, he says, that you go to work in the morning and start working in your office or cubicle. After about an hour, a bell rings, you pack up your work and you go to another office down the hall and begin work on a completely different project. Imagine that you repeated that sequence 5 or 6 times all day, every day. How much productive work, he asks, are you likely to accomplish? And we ask that of our students each day. It's something to ponder. Let's look into timing, or the sequence of learning. Are all students held to the same sequence? Must we do this chapter and then this chapter and on? Or is that sequence adaptable to the individual learning interests of individual students or of individual classes to jump around and meet their needs as they see? Because students want to control timing as well as time. They want schools to see time and timing as variables to be exploited in accommodating their need for practice and play, and their need for just-in-time rather than just-in-case learning. But schools act as if we must meet the sequence as an expectation of its own. That's something to keep in mind. Now that we've mentioned play, let's talk about it a little. Is there always pressure to perform and get that A, or do students have freedom to explore without being labeled as a failure if they don't meet the expectation on the first try? Do students have an opportunity to tinker and hypothesize about what might happen? Students like to play. They want opportunities to mess around and experiment in their learning and in their work. We're not talking about having fun. at least not exclusively, although a bit of that is great as well. What we're talking about is having the time to explore, experiment, and discover. Learning how to do that productively is difficult in schools because the organizational structures don't always support it. Let's look into practice. Practice is necessary for students to engage in to get that deep and sustained understanding before moving on. Are we finishing a chapter or a module and then moving on to the next one without making sure all students have mastered the concept? Or are we allowing them to practice a skill to make sure that it is learned to its full capacity? Practice and play are companions. Practice focuses less on discovery and exploration and more on honing those skills and performances. Practice entails deliberate attention to failing and learning from mistakes, often guided by images of quality and craftsmanship in performance and projects. Looking into choice. Do all students have to follow the same path? Must they take this class prior to taking this class? Or are these 4 classes the only classes offered and so all students follow that pathway? Or do students have meaningful choice? Do they get to decide what, when, and how they learn and what that demonstration of knowledge looks like? Students want choice in what they learn and when and how they learn it. Can I lead with my strengths? Can I focus on getting really good at something that I value and will use later in life? Often kids look back on their high school experience and say, I really wish my school had offered a course in such and such. I'm sure you've done that as well. More and more schools are focusing on a tight curriculum with fewer opportunities for student choice to ensure that accreditation is met or check marks are made towards accountability to the state. Often students, even students with lower test scores, have even fewer options because they must focus on raising those test scores to get into the next class. So focusing on student choice is important. Let's look into authenticity. Our resources talked about it not just being a series of dittos, and that spoke to me. Like, are we just expecting kids to go through the motions and do the same things over and over? Or are we making sure that their work is significant outside of school? Are they engaging in activities that are meaningful to their after-school job or their work towards moving into the college sphere? Does the community recognize the value of what we're asking our students to do, or are we just going through the motions? Recall your school experience. Did you feel at times that you were in a restaurant being fed the menu rather than what's on the menu? The settings, people, places, and context of schools are at best fake real. They're scripted like reality TV. In school, most experiences are indirect, and students have no firsthand experience with real-world mysteries and problems. The curriculum's scope and sequence don't reflect the way knowledge and skills are used in the real world. We all remember the endless word problems and grammar exercises that seem so unlike what real professionals do. These features of schooling contribute to what's being seen as a form of disengagement from the real world. We need to get back to that engagement and ensure students feel like they are getting an authentic education. Challenge. Are we engaging students in challenge? Not just about work completion or getting the A, but addressing those high standards and meaningful standards of excellence. Not just an A, but did they really understand what they were doing or exceed the expectation? Students seek out and embrace challenges outside of school that they see as relevant and push themselves towards excellence. They expect to be pushed to the edge of their competence in school as well, and to be provided with the support necessary to learn on that leading edge. Authentic challenges provide the scope and depth of real-world rigor. Great teachers deliberately promote rigorous learning and rigorously incorporate discipline and cross-discipline knowledge and skills into real-world contexts. Students want and need many opportunities to discover what excellence looks like in the real world so that they're able to engage in it when they're in the real world. And finally, let's look at application. Are all of our learning objectives in the school setting theoretical? Are we just talking about abstract thoughts and theories, or are students given an opportunity to apply those skills in the real world? That application cements the skill and understanding, and not just any application will do. It must be authentic. Application in real-world settings and contexts ensures that students are ready for lifelong learning and work. Application helps them to see their lifelong learning and typically results in tangibles, products, and performances that can be observed and evaluated by the students, their teachers, and others. Students want first-hand experiences in which to develop competency, and they want those experiences to mirror the way professionals in the real world think, perform, and learn. Students want to use what they learn, skills as well as understanding, to address real-world problems and challenges. So incorporating those real-world opportunities is essential for students. Now that we've looked at the 10 norms identified by students, let's think critically about what those student expectations are and make sure that they get equal billing to the school's expectations of students. These are identified as imperatives, the must-haves for every learner to be engaged in schools. So schools should consider these imperatives when evaluating their performance as a school. As we look into the NELP standard, the standard correlation for me, I felt reviewing these 10 expectations and working to help students to achieve their learning norms supports the educational success and well-being of each student and adult by ensuring that education is meaningful and not just a series of lessons followed by tests without any real application beyond the classroom. Having high expectations of students to just jump through a series of hoops does not prepare them for life after high school, nor does it make the process very meaningful. The relevance. This assignment is relevant to my current learning by keeping the student perspective in the forefront. Sometimes educators get so focused on the standards and the expectations for teaching that we forget that the purpose is student learning. If students aren't able to meaningfully apply skills beyond the lesson test, do we really meet their needs? And finally, my reflection. This assignment, together with so many others, helps to influence the decisions I'll make as a leader by reminding me of the why. Students are the reason we're in the business, and we need to circle back and ensure that their needs are met first and foremost. That may require thinking outside the typical school box, and that's okay. Looking into my references, I had two. Leaving to Learn was the reference provided in the module, but when I looked into the URL provided at the end of the YouTube video, Big Picture Learning was also there. It's like an updated website, and they had a few more information on the 10 expectations that I used as a resource. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing those presentations of my fellow students.